Okay, otherwise, I guess we will commence. Is that okay? All right. Okay, I'm Russ McBride. For those of you who are attending remotely, I think everybody here knows who I am already. And this is the first workshop in a series of workshops sponsored by the University of California, Merced Innovation and Design Gateway for Entrepreneurs Hub. And I am going to be talking about 101 recipes to be an entrepreneur, which is really my first lie of perhaps many lies, because I'm really
Not going to
talk about 101 recipes, but I will talk about a lot more than I can count. A little bit about the University of California Merced Innovation and Design Hub. So we connect students and alumni to resources they might need as budding entrepreneurs. We provide space to create together or independently. We assist in finding funding opportunities for students and alumni to apply for, and we create events and workshops like this one that support the entrepreneurship journey. Okay, I am an assistant professor in the Department of Management of Complex Systems, otherwise known as MCS. I'm also the director of a research group that has people from around the world contributing to it. And I'm also a visiting professor at the David Eccles School of Business at the University of Utah. A little bit about my history. You might wonder why you should listen to me at all. And, I probably wouldn't, but I started a software consulting company. So I have a little bit of entrepreneurship experience myself. I was a cubicle slave for some time in high tech at both UC Berkeley and in Silicon Valley. I worked for Apple for precisely 24 hours. I drove down there in the rainstorm for 2.5 hours to Cupertino from Berkeley and decided I wasn't ever gonna do that again. So that didn't last very long. I've been a real estate investor. I used to have about 14 properties in the East Coast, mostly failed at that, in part because I really dislike real estate stuff, even though I'm going to talk about it a little bit today. And I was the director of the Utah Foundry Entrepreneurship Incubator, which generated about 200 million in revenue for the entrepreneurs that went through that. Now, I should mention that today I will be running through a whole bunch of war stories and stories about students who've worked on entrepreneurship projects during the course of a semester in a class here at UC Merced. At Utah, these were students who are dedicated to long-term businesses for the most part. So some of them I saw for a few years or so. So they had a lot wider window of opportunity. And I also teach, in case you haven't figured it out, hands-on entrepreneurship. Okay, so before I continue, I just want to make sure the remote people can hear me and see slides okay. Do we get any responses? Otherwise, I assume they can.
Hi, we're going to check one more time just to double check. If you are here virtually, if you could give us a thumbs up in the chat just to make sure you are able to hear Russ, or yep, we can hear you, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay, otherwise I'll assume everything's copacetic. Cool, we got a thumbs up, great. Okay, there are a number of notable companies that came out of the Entrepreneurship Foundry in Utah, some of which you might recognize. Armor Active's probably the most famous one. They made iPad and iPhone cases and then sold themselves to a bigger company, made a lot of money. Bastion also sold themselves to a company in Ireland for an enormous amount of money I'm not allowed to discuss. A lot of the principles we learned there were built into the $50 million Lassonde Studios, which are studios that students use where they can live, and they also have maker spaces and lots of entrepreneurship support. I've had a long list of speakers throughout the years, including Bernd Voll, who was the former director of the Skydeck Hub or Sky Hub, whatever it's called at UC Berkeley, the entrepreneurship incubator there. Stephen Key, who's probably the world's foremost product licensing expert. Dick Elkis, who more or less invented the VCR. Amos Schwarzfarb, who is the managing director of Techstars in Austin, one of the most successful incubators, Rachel Biesel, who was nominated Entrepreneur of the Year in Colorado, and lots of other folks. In fact, Stephen Key is going to be here in what, a month or a couple of weeks or something, a month, to talk about product licensing and a little bit about patents. Before I get into the meat of the talk, I have to mention, I feel like I have to mention this every time, what I call the Superman myth, because there's this pervasive myth among young entrepreneurs that you need lots of money and probably a loan. You need a clear vision of exactly how each aspect of the business is structured. You need a business plan. It's a huge amount of work. It takes a huge amount of time. You need special traits like exceptional confidence, risk tolerance, intelligence. You need an awesome, innovative product. You need skills for every aspect of the business. That is, you have to know how to do the website. You have to know how to do the product development. You have to know how to do the marketing, etc. Entrepreneurship is inherently insecure, unstable, and risky. And you have to give up your regular job to start a business. And I'm going to say that all of these are false. Now, you can do all of those. All of those could be true, but you don't need to do those. Another thing that's important to mention is that entrepreneurship is a team sport. It is a social activity, right? In contrast to the kind of Superman myth, you have to be a lone hero. Jobs had Wozniak, Bill Gates had Paul Allen, Rockefeller had his brother William. But somehow we always kind of focus on the single lone individual that's miraculously making everything happen, and it couldn't be further from the truth. I should say what entrepreneurship is, since this is a talk about entrepreneurship. And on my pointy-headed definition, it is taking action with the intention to generate economic value under conditions that are novel or uncertain to the agent. That is a mouthful. So let's simplify it to taking action with the intention to make money under conditions that are novel or uncertain to the agent, right? Or taking action to make money in uncertain conditions, more simply. And since I've advanced this definition, and not because of me, a lot of other people that work on entrepreneurship theory have taken uncertainty to be a key cornerstone of entrepreneurship. So that means social entrepreneurship is taking action to do a social good in uncertain conditions. Or in other words, if you want to put this as simply as possible, it's taking action to make money when you don't know what the hell you are doing. Okay. And hopefully this provides a measure of security for you, because I get a lot of students who think they need to know everything that could possibly be known before they can take the first smallest step. And this really causes them to freeze up and not do anything. So the common response I get is that I need to learn so much more before I can start, right? So there's got to be some kind of econ textbook that explains how entrepreneurship works. There's some kind of special secret recipe there, or a special secret business class, or a special entrepreneurship book, or lean startup is a secret, if you've heard of that, or customer discovery, or business model canvas, or perfecting pitch competitions are the secret. And it's not that any of these are not helpful, but what I want to point out is that there is no kind of algorithm that's going to give you everything you need to know in order to start your business, whether it's a business opening a taco stand on the street corner, or starting a new app, or starting a new social media platform, or starting Airbnb or Uber, right? There is no textbook for doing all that stuff. There's a textbook for doing the accounting that you need to use to properly manage the numbers for Uber, and so on and so forth. But in terms of actually starting and running the business, there's not really a secret. If there's any secret, it's that you got to take action despite having no idea what the hell you're doing, and being confused, uncertain, and scared, and then you take some more action. That's the best secret I can come up with. The constants are taking action, having no idea what you're doing, and building novel social agreements with people that can help you advance your venture. Now, I have a whole separate talk on that I call functional entrepreneurship, which I'm not going to do today. Today is going to be more of a scattered talk on different kinds of things you can do to be an entrepreneur. In my opinion, there's only one trait that entrepreneurship does not tolerate, and that's an inability to learn from the action you do take. If you talk to people like everybody from Elon Musk's ex-wife to people who are close to Steve Jobs. They all almost inevitably say one thing is one of the first comments about them, and that is they are incredibly fat. They take a huge amount of action and they learn from it very rapidly. Right. Okay. So 101 recipes. First of all, I should mention this book by Chris Guillebeau called The $100 Startup, which is a book I don't really like that much, but it's an awesome book as an encyclopedia of just hundreds of stories of people who made businesses starting with $100 or less. All right, so this isn't a book to break into Silicon Valley and start the next unicorn billion-dollar revenue business, but it's a great book with tons of stories about everything from a guy who got fired and then started a mattress company where they delivered the mattresses on bikes only, to a guy who, or a pair of guys who started a coupon business in Alaska. So they went to these businesses and they asked the businesses to charge people who had a coupon less than the retail price. They then sold these coupon books for $100, which had like $5,000 of discounts, and they made huge amounts of money. Okay, so I'm going to first go through a very boring kind of taxonomy of different kind of ways to make money, and this is not the end-all be-all taxonomy. There's a lot of other stuff I could include here, and stuff that's asterisked I'm going to dig into in a little bit more detail after I finish going through the taxonomy. So you can sell a product, right? You can sell one that you build, right? So you come up with a novel product and you sell it. You can buy a product that already exists and resell it. And there's this huge surge in the last 10 years of people who go to Alibaba.com and buy some cheap, relatively inexpensive product from China, whether it's baby clothes or bicycles or motorcycles, and then they resell them in the United States for a markup. You can do that by inventorying it yourself, or you can have it drop ship from places that will actually inventory it for you and then ship it directly to the customer. So you're just basically managing the connection and the interaction. You're not actually having to inventory it or do anything like that. By the way, I will go through and run through some anecdotes randomly as we're doing this. So I had one student in my first entrepreneurship class in 2017 here who did exactly this. She purchased organic bamboo baby clothing on Alibaba and started an Amazon storefront. And at the end of the semester, she was making about $4,000 a month just selling that baby clothing. So she's doing pretty well. I haven't talked to her since. It's usually the students that are having trouble that keep in touch with me constantly, and the ones that do really well just go out and buy nice houses and nice cars and don't call me to update me. You can license a product. I will dig into this a little bit by way of prepping before Stephen Key gets here. The idea here is that starting a business is a pain in the butt. And if you just like coming up with cool, creative ideas, you can come up with a cool, creative idea and then sell the idea to a company who will then typically pay you 7% royalties. And they manufacture, market, refine the design, deal with all the problems, including typically paying for the patents to protect that product. So Stephen himself, he'll tell lots of stories, but actually I won't tell his stories except for one, which is a guy local here in Merced who was not a student of mine, but came up with the idea after having his registration tag stolen off his license plate. That was just a plastic license plate frame with two little rectangles, one in each corner, that protected the reg tag. So if you're going to steal a reg tag, it's easier to go to some car that doesn't have that little protective plastic rectangle. It's the kind of thing you could, think up in 2 seconds. He didn't even make a prototype. He just pitched it to a auto parts store and they bought it. And now he just hangs out and plays video games all day because I don't know what he makes, but somewhere between $20,000 and $80,000 a month. So he's doing quite well. And there are tons of product licenses, tons of products you can license. And Stephen Key has a great website illustrating lots of them. There are tons of e-products, that is online products. And I have yet to have a student do one, which is really depressing for me because they're so awesome. You can make an online course or you can do an ebook. I'm going to dig into how to do an ebook a little bit as one of the case studies. You can also generate advertising income. If you're one of those influencers on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or something, you can use that traffic and monetize it through ads. You can build your own website, get enough traffic to it, monetize it with ads. You can enable ad monetization on YouTube, doing the same thing. There's also service work, which Paul knows a lot about. But service work consists of, well, in the service work theory world, everything is service work. But for the purposes here, it's any kind of activity where you're trading time and effort for dollars. So I've had a lot of students do like lawn mowing. I've had an unusual number of students do eyelashes and make a lot of money doing that. One of my first students was a photographer, and the target. So if you come to my class the first day, you show up, I say, hey, I'm Russ, nice to meet you. You've got to make $14,000 over the course of the semester if you want an A, otherwise you get some other grade. Go out and make $1 selling anything and come back and tell me what happened. Through COVID, I dropped the target number a little bit, but in that year with that student who was doing photography, he in one weekend made, I think it was $16,000 or something, just doing a large, it was an Indian wedding. I don't know if anybody's been to an Indian wedding, but there are these fantastic multi-day affairs, typically with a big elephant and lots of rice throwing, and each part of the ceremony lasts hours. Anyway, he just did one wedding and hit the target and made a bunch of money. There is real estate, of course, which we can divide up into residential and commercial. Typically, you're going to buy and flip residential, or you're going to buy and rent it for cash flow. Same thing with commercial. And I'm going to talk about doing a commercial deal as an example a little bit later on. You can also buy a business. And this is something that's typically overlooked by a lot of people. When they think of buying a business, they think of, whatever, Apple buying a, encryption company for $200 million, or, Facebook buying WhatsApp for, what was it, 1 billion or something. But there's a huge number of companies for sale in the lower and middle tiers, for a few $100 up to a few $1,000, $20,000. And you can do what business purchasers do, which is to buy a business, make some improvements in some way. That business is part of a category that's typically purchased for some multiple. So if you buy like a SEO business, the multiple might be like 2x. So you pay twice the annual revenue to purchase that SEO business. But businesses that are doing poorly sell at a lower multiple. And so the idea is to buy a business, improve it in various ways, and then so it's now making more money, and then you also increase the multiple. So you might have spent, say, $10,000 on an SEO business, but it's now making more money. So now maybe it's worth $40,000, but instead of paying 2x, you now sell it for 4x. So you try to win on both sides. You try to make the company more profitable, and you try to sell it for a higher multiple. Right? That's very common across the entire spectrum of businesses. And if you're interested in that stuff, there's a lot of terrible material out there you can spend money on to learn more about stuff. One great guy is Roland Frazier, who's got an incredible amount of really useful material on buying businesses, and typically doing so in ways where you don't have to put out any of your own money. So just to give one example, you can often pay for a business you want to purchase with revenue from the business. So you buy it in January, the business is making, say, $10,000 a month, and you slowly pay off the business with the money from the business. That's one simple strategy for basically buying a business with no money out of pocket. You can also do things like buy a franchise, which I'm not a huge fan of, so I won't talk too much. There's a huge category of financial instruments, right? Investing in stocks, bonds, commodities like gold, silver, copper, Ethereum. I had one student this last semester who, despite all my best efforts to talk him out of it, made some ridiculous amount. I think it was like $26,000 on Ethereum, cryptocurrency. You can also purchase mortgages and other debt notes. And I just remembered I need to turn my phone on because I have a mortgage note person who is going to call us at some point. We can chat with him if we have time. So my phone is on. Okay. You can also start a fund like a hedge fund. And you might think, I can't start a hedge fund. That's insane. That's what billionaires do. And as it turns out, you can actually start a hedge fund. And people like Griffin and Warren Buffett and other people all started hedge funds in their 20s. If you have a little bit of money, you can lend money and make interest off that money. Probably the most safest and most common route is to lend money for real estate, and you can get paid a nice interest rate on that. That's called private money lending. You can also get paid for the use of your credit. So if you have a good credit score, even if you don't have any money, and you're willing to co-sign for someone that you trust, you can get paid for that so that they can get a car loan or a home loan or something like that. That's quite common. If you already are, someone who has made lots of money, you can engage in what are called private placement memorandums. These don't exist in the US, but they exist in the Middle East and in parts of Europe. And it typically requires at least $150 million. So this is out of the reach of most of us. But you basically just prove that you have that money. You don't even have to put it up for collateral. And then based on that money existing, people can provide loans just because your money exists. And you make a lot of money for doing that. That's much more advanced, so we won't talk about that. I think I talked about being an influencer on social media. In addition to getting advertising money, you can also promote products and get paid by sponsors. I'm not the world's biggest fan of the whole influencing trend. And last but not least is what most people typically think of when they think of entrepreneurship, which is building a business from scratch, right? And then you can either hang on to it for the cash flow and the profits, or you can turn around and sell it, right? That's like the most narrow definition of entrepreneurship. And in Silicon Valley, building and selling a business means building a high-tech company and then selling it, right? So entrepreneurship is really much, much broader than that. So Tim Ferriss wrote a book called The 4-Hour Workweek, which a lot of people seem to like. I'm going to mention him here just because he's an example of someone who built and sold a product. He came up with a nutritional supplement and eventually built it up to the point where he was making $40,000 a month in cash flow passively, with the business kind of auto running with a manager that he trusted, drop shippers that he trusted, and customers that he had built up relationships with. Now, the nutritional supplement that he quote unquote invented was just a composite of pre-existing stuff that's super common, like phosphatidylserine and acetyl L-carnitine, and just really common. He just put it together. And what people do when they build these supplements is they say, oh, we've got a proprietary ratio of ingredients, right? And that's supposedly what makes it more valuable than just buying the ingredients yourself. I do want to spend a minute on my favorite story of all time, which was a student of mine who worked at a Del Monte food packing plant in Modesto as a janitor, if I recall correctly. And he overheard his boss talking about how they were spending $97 per mop handle. And he was like, that's crazy. I could probably make one of those for, $12 or so. And so sure enough, he found a machinist. He bought a bunch of aluminum. And it turns out the reason why these handles were so expensive is because these are mops and broom handles for food processing plants. So they couldn't be wood for fear that a wood splinter comes off and gets into Aunt Matilda's peaches, and then she gets a splinter in the roof of her mouth. So they have to be made out of metal. That was like the only requirement for a food processing grade broom handle. So he went to his boss and said, hey, if I can sell you some broom handles for, say, $29 a piece instead of $97 a piece, would you be willing to purchase them? And he was like, heck yeah, I would. In fact, I will pay for all of your supplies and we can see how they work. And for, I don't know what it is about food processing plants, but they go through something like, $5,000 or $10,000 worth of brooms and mops every month. I guess the big ones, I don't get it, but, and I begged him to charge his boss more like $65, instead of $27 or $29. But he didn't listen to me, which is okay. And he found a machinist and basically each aluminum broom handle wound up costing, between the cost of the aluminum and the machining, about $10, right? And then he sold it to his boss for $27. So he was making, whatever minimum wage to Del Monte plant. And then all of a sudden he was making about $6,000 a month in, pretty easy money. And I haven't talked to him since, but I was begging him to just rinse and repeat throughout the entire food processing plant industry in North America, right? Because the reason why those companies were able to sell broom handles for $97 a piece is because there was no competition, right? So I don't know if he did. I hope he did, because he'd easily be pulling in, $1 million a month. So that's my favorite story. I also had a student. I don't know if you guys have seen these YouTube videos, but I've been watching a bunch of them of people that mess around with epoxy and colors and build cool tables and stuff. So I had a student who was into that this last semester, and she made $8,300 selling these cool bamboo epoxy tables just during the semester. I think, let's see, how much time do I have? Okay, I'll talk about this. So I had I'll just call it my stepbrother. This was a guy who would buy really terrible homes in Oakland. Back when you could get a home in Oakland for $500,000, he'd spend about 30 to 50 grand in upgrades, and he'd turn around and sell it for $800,000. Now, you might say, oh, I can't do that. I don't have the money to buy a home, or blah, blah, blah. It's easy to get private money for something where there's collateral involved, like real estate. It's hard to get, private money or investors for something like your idea for a new iPhone app, right? That's very difficult. Getting money for real estate is really easy. What you really need to do is believe that you can do it. And his dad did it. So he just watched his dad do it 1,000 times. And he's like, well, this is easy. I can do it too. And sure enough, he did it too. Okay. So the change now is that if he's not retired at this point, he now has to spend about, $1 million for a really terrible home in Oakland, and put in about 50 grand and then sell it for, 1.5 million or something. So that's a common strategy. Again, I'm not a big fan of real estate. I tried doing it myself with a house in Patterson, not too far from here, and broke even when the buyer went bankrupt. And then the second mortgage note, which I held, got devalued in the court of law. So I'm just not good at real estate. That's Lars Bell. He's my favorite relative. He won't tell me how much money he has, because he has a lot. So he, as far as I could tell, just did a lot of beer drinking at San Diego State University when he was an undergrad. After he graduated, he got together with some friends after the housing market crash, and they decided to buy second mortgage notes, right? So if you don't know what a mortgage note is, the mortgage note is just basically the document that says that you owe money for the money that you borrowed in order to pay for the house. Now, if you do that a second time, you have what's called a second note, and that note in the order of priority is the second one to get paid back should the buyer default, right? So they're considered much more risky. And after the housing market collapse, mortgages were absolutely terrifying, and second mortgage notes were incredibly terrifying. Okay, so this was a huge opportunity, they believed, for these guys. And in the face of everyone who said, don't do it, these are risky, these are terrible, they were able to buy these notes for about closer to 2% actually of their face value. So you might have a second mortgage note, where the house owner might have owed, say, $1 million over the course of the lifetime of that note, for that second note. So he was able to buy that note for like $20,000 or $30,000, right? With his group of, so where did he get the money to do this? He had a group of investors. They got a percentage of the money that the people who own the homes were paying in as part of their regular mortgage payments. And now, say on that note, he collects $8,000 a month for the next 25 years until the note is paid off. Now he's got hundreds of those notes, right? So you can imagine he's got an incredibly large cash stream, and he just has to give, whatever it is, 10% of that cash stream to the investors who help provide that money. Now you can't do this anymore because now these second notes are selling at about 90% of their face value or 96% of their face value. But for that time period after the market crash of 2008, 2009, there was a huge opportunity. Okay, again, I don't like real estate, but commercial real estate's fun. So just a few minutes ago, I went to LoopNet. LoopNet.com is the most kind of famous site for commercial real estate. And I pulled up a couple of options for us to buy. This first one is in Dallas, Texas. It's $20 million. It's a really bad sign right off the bat that they don't mention the income on this apartment complex. So nowhere down here, I realize the Zoom thing's blocking, but nowhere down here does it say how much income they make. Okay, so bad sign, number one. If we look at the numbers, we can see the annual net operating income is almost $500,000, right? But then they have to pay out about $436,000 a year in debt payments. So they have a loan that's eating all their net income. So they've only got about $57,000, $58,000 in cash flow they make every year, which for a $20 million apartment complex is really quite small. And you have a little, a couple of repairs you need to make, some new air conditioning units, and all of a sudden you're in the red. So that doesn't look good. And if we take a look at the loan, it's a $12.25 million loan. So that's nice because you can easily, if you buy that property, you just assume that loan. So you've got a quick $12.25 million, which is nice to have. But it's kind of a bummer of a loan because it's at a fixed rate of 5.25%, interest only for 10 years, expires in 2029. So they've been making all these payments, but they still owe the exact same amount, $12.25 million, because it's an interest only loan. Now, typically you get one of these only so you can improve a place. So it's worth more. And then you get a loan to pay off that loan and things look good. But this one is an indication that we've got desperate sellers that are trying to get out from under a property that's bleeding them dry in all likelihood. Okay, so that's a place we don't want to buy, right? The very second place I looked on LoopNet is a lovely RV resort in Louisiana, hopefully not currently underwater right now. And here they do mention the income right at the top, as they should, because it's got a 10% cap rate. What's cap rate? Cap rate is the net income that the property makes divided by the price of the property, right? So it's 1.49 million divided by 14.9 million, and that's a 10% cap rate. So it makes 10% a year, right? That's a really high cap rate. It's going to be hard to find 5% in California. So if we look at the numbers, and this is when I was into commercial real estate, this is what I did. I actually hired people to just pre-process numbers for me by the hundreds, properties by the hundreds. We take a look at the average occupancy, it's 100%. That's a really good sign. If you see a place that's got 50% occupancy, it's going to cause lots of potential problems. They're asking about $15 million for it. You're making $1.5 million a year. So that looks interesting. This would be a property I would buy, right? So how do you buy it? Russ, I don't have $15 million. Well, it's actually not going to be 15 million, right? It's going to be 15 million plus about $500,000 in commission to the commercial brokers, because they're going to get somewhere between 2 and 8%, typically 3% plus closing costs. So it's really going to cost about $16 million. Okay, Russ, that's cute. Why are you telling this? Like, how could I get 16 million? I can't buy a $16 million property. You actually can. And the main reason you can is because of the United States of America and this thing called the Housing and Urban Development Department, which has a loan called the 223F. where you can get between 80 and 90+% LTV loan to value. That means you can get a loan on this property for 12.75 million at 35 years, amortized at 3%. What is that? That is a very nice loan. And it's not like that last loan. This loan gets paid down. So at the end of those 35 years, you owe $0, right? So your tenants are paying your mortgage payments for you over this whole time. And eventually you own the place outright. But we're still short about $3.5 million. So where can you get, $3 or $3.5 million to make up the difference between the Housing and Urban Development 223F loan and the rest of the $16 million? Well, that's where you get private money. And again, when I teach my classes, I am always discouraging my students from getting money, typically because they don't yet know how to manage it responsibly without practice. And also because there's a time and a place when you need the money. And a lot of the time you don't need that money, especially at the beginning. This is one of those cases where in order to make the deal happen, you do need the money, you do need to find private investors. So, and is it hard to find private money when you're dealing with a giant piece of collateral where they can get their money back in all likelihood if things go bad? No, it's really not that hard. So here's what the numbers look like. The property is going to cost your RV park in Louisiana, right? I realize RV parks aren't super exciting and I don't go to bed dreaming about RV parks, right? But these are business deals, right? So this costs $16 million. You can get a 223F HUD loan for 85%, right? Which is $12.75 million. That means your mortgage payments are going to be about $648,000 a year. If you get $3 million in private money at roughly 6%, which isn't too unreasonable this year, maybe it'd be a little higher, maybe 7 or 8%. That's about $250,000, maybe $300,000 at the outside in terms of payments to your private money investors. So the total debt costs are about $900,000. The property costs or the net income is $1.5 million. So that leaves you with $590,000 a year. Okay, so obviously, there's a lot of things to do if you're going to buy a big commercial property. You have to have someone go out and appraise it. You have to check a lot of stuff. You have to check the records and so on and so forth. But the first thing you want to do is run some rough numbers. And I don't know about you, but it wouldn't be too hard for me to live on $590,000 a year. Okay? So that's how you buy a commercial property, and it's not too hard. The problem is that most people wind up looking at something like the first property and they kill themselves to figure out how to buy it, and they buy it and they're bleeding money and it's a big disaster. So if you choose right, you can make money. Or as someone, maybe Warren Buffett said, you make money when you buy it, not when you sell it. Right? So make sure you buy a property that has the opportunity to make money. Okay, I mentioned the license plate story. So I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive. I'm going to do a shallow dive into product licensing, or how to make money licensing a product without starting a business, which Stephen Key is going to go into in a lot more detail and with a lot more charm when he comes by. But this is one of those areas where there actually is a recipe or an algorithm for making money. You come up with a product idea, you design the product. You don't have to do so professionally. You just have to, lay out the basics of it. You get something called a provisional patent. So a regular patent is going to cost you, maybe 20 or 30,000. To get a provisional patent is going to cost you about $90, right? That provisional patent gives you 1 year of protection on your idea. You then make what's called a sell sheet, perhaps a video, which is just a one-page sheet that tells what your product is and what the advantages are. And then you contact companies who have a likelihood of purchasing your product idea from you. That is the algorithm. It's super easy to follow. The only grunt work involved, well, you've got the creative work of coming up with an idea in the first place, right? And inevitably my students come up with like these complex electronic devices that want to beam lasers off satellites and then, reset their video game and blah, 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 and connect to the Bluetooth in the car. Like that stuff's The idea is to come up with something obscenely simple, right? So I mentioned the license plate holder. One of Steven's students came up with the idea. He didn't like the fact that you had to use these toxic chemicals to clean out clogged drains. And so he came up with this idea of a piece of plastic that was about 3 feet long and had little barbs on the side. And you just stick it down your drain and you pull it back up and it grabs all the hair and gunk that's in your drain, right? It costs like 6 cents to make, and they sell it at every hardware store in the world now for like $12.99 or something. He never has to work again. It's the world's simplest idea, right? That's the kind of idea you want. Stephen will tell you about the time when, back when Michael Jordan was popular. I'm not a big sports guy, as it turns out. But I do know who Michael Jordan was, famous basketball player. And he had this idea for a basketball backboard that you could put in your little office cubicle, about this big, that had a giant plastered face of Michael Jordan on the backboard. And his someone close to him told him that was the stupidest idea that she'd ever heard of in her entire life. He sent it off to Ohio Art, who happened to have a licensing agreement with Michael Jordan. Within 24 hours, they FedExed him a copy of a contract, and he made, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of dollars on these little Michael Jordan backboards that everybody wanted to put in their office cubicle so they could, be like Michael or something. Okay. So you have to initiate some creative effort in the beginning. Then you just follow the algorithm, and then you have to do the grunt work of calling up companies and making contact with them to see if they're interested in your idea. So, and if you see in the Q&A that there are any questions, let me know. I was hoping this would be more interactive. There are lots of ways of coming up with an idea. I'm not going to go through that. I do want to mention that you do not need to build a prototype. So in the Michael Jordan basketball backboard case, he did, but that's only because it took him like 10 minutes. He just got some cardboard and a poster of Michael Jordan and glued it on there, and then folded it in half and sent it to Ohio Arts. But you don't really need to come up with a prototype of your product, right? I don't think the guy here from Merced came up with a prototype of the license plate thing. He just described it. He said, imagine the usual plastic license plate frame, but it's got 2 little rectangular spots in the top corners underneath which your reg tags go, right? And that was it, right? You certainly don't need to have a working prototype. And it's easy to get help from people if you need to come up with decent drawings that look good on places like elance.com or fiverr.com or guru.com. If you don't know how to do drawing or illustration, or you need someone to do CAD designs or whatever, you do not need to get a provisional patent application, but it is nice when you talk to companies who might want to buy your idea to be able to tell them that you've got a PPA. And that makes them feel a little bit more comfortable. Typically, what Stephen will recommend that you do is get a PPA, and then if the product actually needs real patents, then that is part of what the company will pay for along with your royalties. And they're happy to pay, the 20 grand once, twice, or 3 times for 1 to 3 patents to protect all the money that they're making from their product, the other 93%. It's easy to get a PPA. I shouldn't say it's easy. It's annoying to get a PPA. You have to go through a government website, and those are rarely well designed. But if you go to uspto.gov, you can go through the process yourself. Stephen typically offers his students some software which streamlines it and makes it a little less painful and a little bit faster. That's about $100. The PPA fee, I guess it's $70. I thought it was $90. Anyway, it's a relatively easy thing to do. And then you make a sell sheet. Here is a sell sheet for someone's invention of a paint can drip catcher. And it just has a picture of the product It mentions the, top things about the product, what it can do and why it's good. And this is what you're going to send to the company. So you're going to call up the company. If they show interest, say, hey, can I email you my sell sheet? You email them their sell sheet, and then you say, hey, let's do a deal. I had one student with a fairly complex idea. Again, I like the really simple ones, but his idea was to figure out a way where large stadiums like the Staples Stadium could make money on the seats of people that didn't show up for that particular game, right? Which is an enticing thing for the stadium, who can now make double the money on some small number of seats where the people didn't show up. This required an app that had to integrate with their customer processing app and their live seating app and all sorts of stuff. So it was a little bit more complex to implement, but Staples was actually quite interested. And so we had a call, Stephen, myself, and the student, about implementing it. And I think maybe if things continue to get better with COVID, they might actually go forward with that. But it was right when COVID was starting, and they were like, okay, yeah, there's no one in the stadiums anyway, so we're just not going to think about it right now. Typically, I ask my students to contact 30 companies, and I just made that number up because otherwise they'll only contact like 5, and it's a numbers game. It's kind of like selling insurance. If you go to 3 doors, you're not going to sell insurance. You go to 30, you're probably going to get at least 1 buyer. I have scripts to help students who get nervous on the phone. I won't bother going for these. The scripts I'm using now were actually written by one of my students who thought through this a whole bunch and tried a bunch of things and figured out what worked and what didn't work when he was trying to get through to companies. I want to mention one other story. Let's see, I guess my second year teaching entrepreneurship here, I had a couple of gals, and they weren't interested in like building a business or even really making money, but they did want to help out the community as much as they could. And so the target was 14 grand that year too. And so what they did, and what I let my students do, is hit the profit target with either actual profit, money they make, or the equivalent value in social goods calculated, some reasonable way. And so what they did was basically, they had these kits they made for single unwed mothers in Merced that included like baby beanies and some food supplies and a baby blanket and stuff that they had made by people who volunteered their time. And they put those all together and they donated them. Oh, and they also got some money to pay for some of the supplies for that stuff by doing a giant like clothing drive in combination with, I think, the UC Merced security and police folks here. And anyway, the bottom line is they provided over 14 grand worth of single unwed mother newborn kits for a huge number of Merced single mothers. So students, at least in my class, are allowed to do, they can do a social entrepreneurship venture, or they can do a for-profit venture. And I want them to do whatever they're most motivated to do, because then they actually do it. Okay, so let's see. I don't know if this is going to work, but let's take this call. Okay, Lars.
Yes, how's it going? I don't know if it's sounding clear because I'm in the car, but
Okay, I'm trying to put you right by my mic, so I don't know if the people here can hear you, probably not, but the people online probably can. I just went through like 20 minutes ago your story about mortgage notes.
yes.
So, and we're wrapping up here in a few minutes, so I thought I'd give you 30 seconds to make any comments. Like, are you willing to share with us what your, say, monthly income is from your mortgage notes? Probably not, huh?
I mean, I mean, my monthly income, I would say, I mean, we have a bunch of different funds and I make different percentages off those funds. So I would say it's probably, and it's also really hard to answer that because we get payoffs. So on the passive income with just the notes paying, I would say it's probably around like $8,000 to $9,000 a month. But then every time a note pays off, like the borrower refinances out of that, then I get a large chunk. I get a large payment.
Yeah,
And that's
because that
happening
note
a
gets
lot now.
paid off.
Yeah, and that's
okay.
happening a lot now because of the interest rates are really, really low.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
people, mhm.
So it's hard to say. Okay, I guess now is not the time to try to imitate your business strategy in the current market. How much are second mortgage notes costing on the open market these days? I told everybody about 90% on the dollar.
It depends, every asset is unique. But yeah, if you have a California second with a lot of equity, which a lot of them have now, you're looking in the 90s. And the
Yeah.
reason they're that high is because typically interest rates on seconds are a lot higher than firsts. So you can have like a 9-10% interest rate associated with a second mortgage. And so people would pay, investors would pay a lot of money for that note.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you more, but I've only got like 5 minutes left and I got to get through some other stuff, but I appreciate you calling. I thought it'd be fun for folks attending live and remotely to, I don't know, just hear somebody else besides me for a minute.
Yeah, no problem. And that price on California notes was probably in the 40s about like 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's just to put it into perspective.
So the opportunity
an
is
investment.
closed for now, that's for sure.
Yeah, I don't know if it's ever going to come back the way
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's catch up later. I'll give you a call tomorrow when I'm not giving a live lecture, and we'll talk some more.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, thanks, Lars. See ya.
All right, you're welcome. Bye-bye.
Okay, so I don't know. I just thought that would be fun. I've also got a guy at the Housing and Urban Development Department who does the 223 commercial multifamily loans, and sometimes I'll call him, but those calls don't always go as well because I think he's got a slight alcohol problem. But okay, I am just going to mention a couple of things. Can I go back? Yes. So I love ebooks. I have yet to have a student who has made an ebook, even though it's really easy to do. If you're thinking about doing an ebook, do a search on Google, check and see if there are at least 30 to 100,000 searches for your topic. There are also more advanced tools with which you can analyze the viability of, say, an ebook or an online course. SEMrush.com, keywordtool.io, app.wordstream.com. All these things cost money, but they give you more detailed analytics on the topic you're thinking about. Ask yourself if it's a real world problem that people are thinking about, that they're already spending money on, and how you can reach them. Ideally, something super hyper specific is a way better book topic than something really broad like how to improve yourself, right? So a marketing coach for musicians, that's supposed to be director of a golf, how to be director of a golf camp for women, how to clean your mobile home, a natural remedy for, say, a particular kind of arthritis. All these things are very specific niches that are much more likely to attract potential buyers of your ebook. Typically what you do is set up what's called a flycatcher page, which is a web page where people are allowed to post questions about your topic, and you can offer a free book for the first 100 questions you get. So this is like, if you don't know how to write a book, right, this is one of the things you can do. And then you just get, you take 1,000 questions and you pick the top 8 to 12 questions, and each of them becomes one chapter for your book. Then, like, what if you can't write? I can't write, Russ. I don't know how to write. Writing's hard. I don't know how to do. Okay, hire a writer, right? It's easy to hire a writer. You can go to elance.com, Content Divas, VWorker, Guru.com, or if you want to make use of a disparity in the economics of certain idea academic professions, it is extraordinarily easy to go to an English PhD student or a history PhD student who would love to make, say, 500 or 800 or $1,000 on the side doing some easy reading and putting together a 40-page ebook for you. Not hard to do. If you don't like doing that, you can also interview experts in that particular field, right? Or do some kind of online webinar and then just post those interviews as part of a course. All very simple things to do. If you don't like any of those ideas, you can buy what are called private label rights, PLR ebooks, and then resell them. With those, you can just change the title, change the contents, and use your name. And if you're looking for a place where you can find those, you can go to masterresalerights.com for a collection of them. You can also contact someone who already has a course or an ebook and buy a license to resell it. Typically, that won't cost very much money. And there are other things you can do. Selling it is a different matter. You've got to do the normal online marketing strategies to sell those things. But if you do them right and you picked an interesting topic, I had a grad student who did a search and realized that there was no book on what was it, Paul? Like how to grow marijuana at home or something. It was something like that. Yeah, I was just like, there isn't. That's just like write that book yesterday. And she easily could have spent whatever $600 having someone else write it. Buy a couple $100 worth of Amazon books, have them shipped to a poor desperate English PhD student, have them write it, then you sell it, put up a website. Anyway, she wound up not doing it for reasons I don't know, but I think that would have done pretty well. I'm going to wrap up here with how to start a hedge fund, and then just mention a couple more student stories, and we'll close it off. There's this guy, Bridger Pennington, in Ogden, Utah, who has a bunch of courses on how to start funds. Some of the material is pretty good, but I would just tell you how to start a hedge fund. So it seems like you need billions of dollars, you need to be super famous, you need tons of investors. What you really need is something that will give you the possibility that accredited investors in places like pension funds and other funds will invest with you. Now, if you're like some of my students last semester who in the skyrocketing market made a ton of money in stocks or Ethereum or whatever, that helps you exactly nada, because no accredited investor or pension fund in their right mind is going to look at your little Schwab or E-Trade or Robinhood account and look at those numbers and believe that they're real, and then believe in you and believe in your investing ability based on those numbers. So you need to get an accredited audit, right? You need to get an audit from an auditor that famous investors, wealthy investors know. And you can do that on your hedge fund. The trouble is it's going to cost about $30,000+ just for the legal fees to set up your hedge fund, and then another maybe 50 or 70 to get office space and workers and everything else. So what do you do? Here's the secret. You create what's called an incubator hedge fund, which costs about $3,000 in legal fees and includes a professional audit on your incubator hedge fund. So you set up a few of them. You can do that for about $6,000 to $8,000. The one that goes well, you hang on to, and you pretend the other two never existed, just like the mutual fund companies do. So mutual fund companies start a bunch of mutual funds, and the 38 that do poorly, they pretend never existed, and the 1 or 2 that do well, they then start marketing. So now you've got, assuming you do well, you've got an independent audit from a professional auditing agency that accredited investors and professional funds will recognize and acknowledge. And it really doesn't make a difference how much you used, a few $100, $1,000, $10,000. If you made a 50% return, they will pay attention, right? If you made an 18% return with very low volatility, they will pay lots of attention, right? At that point, you get commitments from accredited investors to invest a lot of money in your fund. The typical hedge fund will be about $100 million. And then you use some of that money for the fees of setting up the fund. And typically in a hedge fund, it's going to be structured as a 220 where you take 2% of the funds under management to cover management fees. And then you pay your investors 20% of any profits. And if you go underwater for a while, they don't pay anything, right? If you get back up to your high point in your equity curve, then they start paying you. So anyway, that's just a little trick if you want to start a hedge fund. And I am out of time. So I've got a number of stories from past students who did all sorts of things, including reselling sneakers for $6,000. One kid made $14,000 selling insurance of all things. I had a gal who bred Frenchie dogs, made $7,200. One guy traded Dogecoin, made 25,000. Some kid started a house cleaning business, made 6,000. Anyway, lots and lots of stories, but I'm over time, so I'm going to stop there after speaking rapidly for an hour straight. So thank you. And for those of you online, thanks for watching. I see some chats. I don't see any questions. So unless you guys actually have any questions, we'll call it quits.
I'm a part of a cricket group. It's just like a little crafting thing. There's a girl who sells her own book on how to start crafting with it, and every day some of them are crafting. It's like, oh, buy this, it'll teach you how to do it. So just word of mouth, just making a how-to craft.
Yeah, I love ebooks. You make it once and you sell it forever. Yeah. Okay, thanks everyone, and thanks everyone attending remotely. Have a great evening.